Hey folks, welcome. Not so long ago, the beta patch notes got posted on the Games Together website for Humankind, and we're going to take some time to go over them and see what's what. This is my first time looking at the patch notes, so we're just going to discuss initial impressions. I haven't really had the opportunity to play yet, and I've got my coffee here ready to go. So we'll go through these changes. So remember, this is just a beta, so there might be other changes between now and when it goes live, and I think they're aware of some of the bugs. I believe I read on the Discord as well that they fixed the bug regarding siege units and bombardment. So if you didn't know, anything that can target something with fortification, so like a district. So anything like artillery, trebuchets that you can build if you're sieging a city, that sort of thing. If the district or fortification were destroyed, you couldn't target the unit that was on that tile, which really diminished the value of artillery. And I believe I saw on the Discord that that's been fixed in the beta, which is very good news. So anyway, we'll start from the top here. So first up is influence balancing. So reduce the cost impact of number of enacted civics. That's probably a good change. The civic cost got pretty insane. Attaching outposts, reduce the impact of already attached outposts by 40%. Okay, so that's going to slightly encourage larger cities, depending on what's been changed with stability. Merging cities, okay, the buyout cost impact of infrastructure reduced. That's a good one, I think. Honestly, like hardly anyone merges cities, because really the only benefit to doing that is retaining the population. You can just pillage them and then plop an outpost down and then attach, and it'll grow back pretty fast. So now obviously if you had a city that didn't have infrastructure, you can get some extra infrastructure at kind of at the cost of influence, but the influence cost was way too high to justify it most of the time. Vassalization. Okay, I don't really use vassalization because it's very expensive. Okay, every 200 fame should provide a 10-point reduction in war score cost. Okay, so it's still going to be very expensive to vassalize, especially like somewhat larger empires, but I'm in favor of trying to increase the actual use of vassalization rather than just taking your cities, which is what you want to do most of the time. Militarist affinity. Okay, so just this one affinity. So change to iron reserves. It's incredibly powerful when exploited by an experienced player. Found that more casual players find it extremely weak and almost never use it. So we're making some tweaks to make it feel better while fixing some bugs and unintended uses. Okay, so militia units in eras 5 and 6 now cost 2 pop each to raise. Siege is unaffected. Okay, so once they get guns, basically it'll cost you, 8 food or whatever instead of 4. Militia units can be upgraded into professional units in the anti-cavalry branch. Interesting. So basically, that actually makes for some interesting synergy with some merchant cultures, if you've picked them in the past, or if you just have strong gold generation, because you can effectively instantly raise an army and then just upgrade it into actual professional units without having to spend any time producing it. I actually think that's an incredibly powerful change. And because there are, other than in the classical era, that won't matter very much, but beginning in the medieval and certainly in the early modern, when you get to halberds, that'll be quite good. Militia units are no longer free to heal. Okay, that's fine. Fix an exploit that created population when upgrading and disbanding units. Okay. Adjusted ability cooldown to scale with game speed and army size. All right. So really, these are the main important ones here. The militia units no longer being free to heal. That was always kind of silly. All right. So culture balancing, which is what we're really all here for. So Phoenicians. Let's see what we got. Phoenicians LT loses early naval tech cost reductions. Okay, so they can no longer blitz down the tech tree fast to get their harbor, or their haven, as it was called. But they gain +1 CS and +1 movement speed on naval units. Okay. The EU becomes naval transport. Okay, I like that. Unlocked with fishing, 13 CS, 2 movement speed. And with the LT, it's obviously 14 CS and 3 movement speed. I actually like that change. The buy ream was really stupid, honestly. Like, there were some situations in which you could use it, because, if you're playing on a map where there are multiple continents, you might be able to explore and meet some other people before before others and begin to trade with them. The problem was that was kind of unreliable, and the EU becoming a naval transport actually enables the Phoenicians to perhaps have access to certain areas that other people won't earlier in the game. So you can go and claim islands that might have luxuries on them or whatever, which I think is a more valuable use of an emblematic unit than the Byreme in the ancient era, at least than it was. So obviously the Phoenicians gain access to the Pentacontor, which is the normal unit in that era, and the EQ gains a +1 food worker slot. Okay, so the Phoenicians, I like the change to the EU. I don't know if I like the change to the legacy trait or the emblematic quarter. The Phoenicians really struggle because they don't get anything until they get their emblematic quarter, and then their emblematic quarter is like kind of crappy anyway. Like, sure, harbors are good, but if you want to play a harbor game, honestly, just play the Harappans. They're much better at it than the Phoenicians are, because of their bonuses to growth. Yeah, I don't know, because it's going to take a long time. Because you want to buy out with influence all the harbors with the Phoenicians, so you're going to be waiting even longer to actually get access to them again. I think they kind of might have missed the mark on that one, but I'll have to play the Phoenicians again. Hittites, okay. Legacy trait, tech cost reduction to wheel replaced with +20 FIMs per occupied city in each of their own cities. This effect ends with the war. So if you are occupying an enemy city during a conflict, you get +20 to all your outputs in all your own cities. Okay, and emblematic quarter provides +3 money and +20 health regen to friendly units and territory. Okay, I think that's fine. The health regen's kind of interesting, actually. You can be a little more aggressive with the Hittites. Okay, so they no longer get the cost reduction to the wheel, so it's still going to take a while to get the chariot online, their emblematic unit, the Gigia or whatever it's called. But there's +20 to FIMs for occupied city on each of their own cities. Okay, so I see what they're going for with this, right? So the Hittites, you're kind of a warmonger. You want to play very aggressively, kind of rush your opponent, right? I think I have a bit of an issue with this in the very early game, in that usually in those conflicts, there's only one enemy city, and as soon as you take that city, you end the war. So you're not really going to get the benefit of this +20 FIMs a lot in early game. Now in the sort of later end of the Ancients, when wars start to drag out a little bit, yeah, you'll get some benefit out of that. I'll have to play with the Hittites. I'm not sure how to feel about this one. I feel like by the time that +20 FIMs is really going to come into play, you're going to be late enough in the game that it's not going to be that substantial of an increase to your outputs. I feel like this will shine in like the late Ancient into the Classical, and then like from the Medieval onward, it's basically going to be completely useless. I think the issue with this is really that the Hittites have to get to the point where they're occupying an enemy city first, and they don't have any benefits really to doing that other than their +1 CS, which I think I'd still rather play the Mycenaeans or something in most situations. Okay, the Assyrians, Dunu counts as a commons quarter. Oh, interesting. So they're going to take the approach of adding commons quarters to things. I hope that applies to Triumphal Arch as well. The Mycenaeans, EQ loses additional industry bonus. I think that was only +3. I'm not concerned for the Mycenaeans here. I think you go from like +15 to +12 on a really good Cyclopean fortress, so that one's not a big deal. Olmec, legacy trait gives +3 influence per territory, previously +1. Okay, that might be extremely good, actually. I'm looking forward to seeing this in play. The +1 per territory was pretty weak, +3 influence that early in the game per territory can make a big difference, though, in your ability to claim more territories, to buy out the luxury extractors, to claim wonders, all that kind of stuff. Olmec were very weak on the influence generation. Honestly, they were outclassed by the Assyrians if you knew what you were doing. So I'll be excited to play with that. Okay, the Romans. All right, the emblematic quarter permanently gives +5 influence, +5 stability for each adjacent district, and it counts as a commons quarter. Okay, I like that change. I thought the whole thing with Victorious it made it not relevant a lot of the time. Emblematic quarter gives +50 fame if completed while city is victorious. Okay, so the idea is if you win a battle, you build, or a war, whatever, and you build the triumphal arch, and you get some extra fame. I think that is, okay, so that is very flavorful. I like the flavor of that, but I think from a gameplay perspective, that's way too micromanagey. Like, you queue up a bunch of these quarters, and you have them all like one turn from finishing, right? And then you just keep them, you have to keep them in your queue until you win a war, if you want to get the fame. I just think that's too much kind of garbage for the player to be handling at any given time, too in the weeds in terms of how you're managing your outputs and your production. But I do like the flavor of it. I just think from a gameplay perspective, that might be a little annoying. Okay, legacy trait, -30% upkeep production replaced with +50% experience gain on unit, as army upkeep seems to rarely be a concern for players. That is true. Also, if army upkeep is rarely a concern, why did you release the Argentinians like you did, Amplitude? Please let me know that. Anyway, +50% experience gain on unit. Honestly, I'd rather have the upkeep reduction. The upkeep reduction in the early eras can actually be pretty important because you're not going to have invested a lot in producing money quite yet unless you played like the Phoenicians or the Nubians in the ancient era. So the upkeep reduction can be quite impactful, at least at the time that the Romans get it, because of how many armies you're going to have and how little money you're actually generating. I find that experience is really not that difficult to get to begin with. So I'll have to see this in practice, I guess. Legacy trait lost the research cost for Imperial Power, the reduction, that's fine. Didn't need it anymore. Praetorian Guard, lose 1 CS, now 29. I also think that's fine since Praetorians come in quite a bit earlier than they used to, because they used to mock with Imperial Power. So Romans, quite a few changes. I'll be interested to give them a shot. Goths, legacy trait removed ransack combat strength bonus. Okay. Legacy trait added, +25% of ransack gains earned as science per army unit. It's currently bugged, provide 50% bonus instead. Okay, so does that mean 25% of the gold gains are earned as science per army unit? So does that mean, say, you have 4 units in your army, and you ransack an outpost, you get 100% of the science as you do gold? Is that what that means? Either way, I think that's interesting, though I don't know if the ransack combat strength bonus being difficult to understand for players and then replacing it with this is actually any more clear. But I do think this makes for a much more interesting change and much more flavorful change, because the Goths really lacked any ability to keep up in terms of outputs. So if you can generate outputs by being at war and ransacking stuff, that is a good change in my opinion, because the Goths were just not worth playing pretty much ever. Emblematic quarter base yields unchanged, but no stability penalty. Okay, I can get behind that. I think it's just influence and faith. So kind of like the Nazca Lions, I believe, don't have a penalty. I think it makes sense for this EQ to not have a stability penalty. Emblematic quarter also increases the ransack bounty by +5%. Okay, so synergizes nicely with the legacy trait, and it counts as a commons quarter. All right. So good changes to the Goths. I'll be excited to play them, actually. That looks very interesting. Era 2 nomads, or Era 2+ nomads, so the Huns and the Mongols. So they no longer gain food as combat spoils, so they can't just multiply by winning fights, I suppose. Now can collect special pasture curiosities that spawn on prairie and dry grass, which give food. Okay. So it kind of reduces the viability of the Huns and the Mongols a little bit in situations where you don't have a lot of that territory. So if you're like in a desert or something, Huns and Mongols might not be as good. This whole gaining food as combat spoils was always a big issue with the Huns and the Mongols. So I actually support that being removed because it's going to make them easier to balance going forward, though I do think they're a little bit on the weak side still. Huns, legacy trait, added +5 science per unit on hostile territory. Okay, so if you are just standing around in enemy territory with a bunch of units, you get extra science. I I like that, honestly. I think the Huns were another culture that you struggle to pick, especially in single player, because you don't get any benefits in terms of your actual outputs unless you like capture an enemy city, and you even kind of reduce your own ability to get economic outputs because you can't attach any territories. So getting the ability to get some science by being aggressive, kind of like with the Goths as well, can make a big difference, I think. So that'll be interesting to play with. Garamantes, EQ now provides +1 food on exploitation on local territory. I think you just need one territory there. Does that mean like +1 food on exploitation? So is that like the legacy trait with the Hrappen? So for the EQ you get, if you have an EQ in the territory, you're also getting the +1 food on all exploitations in that territory. Okay, that seems like a buff. EQ provides +2 food per adjacent sterile tile. Okay, I think that's probably good. There was no reason to place it in sterile tiles before. EQ must now be built next to sterile stony field or rocky field. Okay, that's a good change. So the thing with the Garamantes is that it was supposed to be like this culture that you pick that allows you to make use of very low food areas and kind of supplement your food production. But it was always better to just place those items like in a place where you had a bunch of food because you got more food outputs because they can be placed anywhere in the territory. That's a good change. It actually makes the Garamantes do what they're supposed to do. I'm not sure about this +1 food on exploitation on local territory. We'll have to see what that actually means. I think it means that entire territory gets +1 food. But at the same time, if you're, well, I don't know. If you're building it in like a sterile area, you're not going to have that much food to begin with. We'll have to see how it plays. I think this one might be a little exploitable, though. It might make it even better than it was. Okay, Era 3, Aztecs. Emblematic quarter now counts as a commons quarter. Okay, continuing with that theme. Emblematic quarter gives +10 stability instead of +5. All right. Now, I do find medieval is where stability problems really come to a head. So anything that gives extra stability is going to make any culture more competitive in the medieval. Emblematic quarter provides double yield while sacrificing. Does that mean it doubles the faith and influence and stability, I assume? And emblematic quarter provides +1 CS to all units per sacrificing city. Interesting. So if you have, say, 5 cities and you have sacrificing on all 5, you get +5 CS to all your units. Huh. That is interesting. So the Aztecs are kind of like a trash spam culture, right? So you can they reduce the cost of all your units and the movement speed, so you can like constantly funnel a bunch of these low-cost units up to the front. What this means is that your trash can also be very powerful, having buffs to your CS. So even if you're behind in technology, you can have comparable CS to someone that isn't like an era ahead of you. So this actually kind of makes the Aztecs pretty strong. Like, you can use them as a catch-up culture, but they might even be better if you're ahead to really double down on the CS. Interesting. My opinion of Aztecs had improved recently compared to what they had been. I think this does make them even stronger, so we'll have to see how they play. Mongol legacy trait added -25% vassalization cost reduction. Okay, fine. I don't really care about that, honestly. Okay, Era 4 Ming. Replace +1 influence on territory with +10 influence per enacted civic. That's much better, honestly. That's much more thematic compared to what they had. +1 influence on territory in the early modern was like the most useless part of the legacy trait I've ever seen. And +10 influence per enacted civic makes much more sense with what the Ming are supposed to be, with their flavor, with the rest of their kit. So I think that's a good change. Emblematic quarter no longer provides stability, but counts as commons quarter instead. Okay. Fine. I do think the +10 stability on the emblematic quarter was a little much to begin with. Counts as a commons quarter now, so you have to be a little bit more smart about how you place it, but I don't think that impacts it too much. Emblematic quarter restricted +1 influence on district effect to local territory. Okay, so it's not in your entire city, it's just on the territory that you place it in. That is a very substantial nerf to the emblematic quarter. Do you make up for it with the legacy trait? Probably not. That's going to hit the Ming pretty hard if you're only getting the +1 influence on district to the local territory. That is enormous. That's hugely substantial. So basically what that means is that to get the influence output, so neglecting the commons quarters, to get the influence output that you had before this change, you have to have a grantee house in every single territory, and that would be equal to 1 tea house on the current patch. So because you're on the current patch, you get +1 influence on every district in your city. I think that might be a bit of an over nerf. I'm not sure. I wish you could do stuff like +1 influence or +1 money for every 2 districts or something like that. But Amplitude doesn't seem to want to take that approach. I think this is going to be a problem for the Ming, though. Polls. Emblematic quarter now counts as commons quarter. Okay. Polls were already very good for stability. And I think the emblematic quarter already counts as a garrison as well. So polls really hitting hard with stability stuff. Venetians, legacy trait, added +1 influence per trade route to existing effect. Okay, that's fine. Emblematic quarter, +2 money-based yield was +1. Okay, that's like the least important change. Emblematic quarter, +2 influence per adjacent district was +1. Okay, so extra influence. Really nothing important for the Venetians. Spain, emblematic quarter now gives +5 stability. It was previously -10, and it counts as a commons quarter. Interesting. So I think that in general, the Ottomans were often a better pick than the Spanish because of the cost reduction on artillery. It made it very, very cheap for the Ottomans to spam artillery, and they were pretty comparable in every other respect. So the Spain legacy trait, gives that +3 CS when you start in enemy territory, which can be nice, but that cost reduction on artillery, which is very expensive, was way better. I think this gives a better use case for the Spanish compared to the Ottomans, because it can help you with stability issues, which is actually a lot harder to get now. All right, Era 5, so the industrial. Ethiopia, legacy trait effect boosted to +10 science on garrison was +5. Okay, that's a good change. That legacy trait was garbage. It might not be as bad now. So the thing is a lot of these emblematic quarters are now being counted properly as garrisons, so you might already have some. So stuff like the English stronghold or the Cyclopean fortress, whatever it is. So you might have some of those hanging around already. And +10 science on garrison, you might get an okay effect out of that. I think what I would really like to see, though, is the legacy trait making garrisons science quarters. I think that would be a lot better and give Ethiopia a better use case. Legacy trait gains CS of hostile units within borders gained of science. So the opposite effect to the change to the Huns, I guess. So the CS of units in your territory give you science. Okay, so solidifying Ethiopia is a very defensive culture. Emblematic quarter now counts as a commons quarter. Okay, Kind of a weird one because the EQ is placed on mountains, so it's not going to be surrounded by very many things, but it also counts as a garrison. So it's got that going for it. Zulu, emblematic quarter counts as farmer's quarter and serves as a construction anchor like a hamlet. Okay, so it's a garrison that's also a farmer's quarter, so this is kind of ripping off the English here, which I don't mind. I kind of think that works for the Zulu. And the emblematic quarter now gives plus 25 XP on new units and was previously plus 10. I do think this helps the Zulu a little bit be more competitive. It was really hard to justify picking the Zulu in most cases, but you can get a little bit of extra food from the emblematic quarter, which is all right. French. EQ's collective minds effect, good, because that sucks now. And emblematic quarter gains plus 2 science per trade route. Interesting. Huh. By the point of the game I'm picking the French, I usually don't have a lot of trade routes. That's just me personally. But I could see for some players how that might be really good if you have established a lot of trade agreements. So the Russians, legacy trait loses the old effect, so that was extra experience on unit creation based on like attached outposts. Legacy trait gains minus 25% outpost creation cost and plus 10 fortification on settlements. The old legacy trait was better. Why would you do that? No one is creating outposts at this point in the game. The entire world is settled in the industrial era. And 10 fortification, it like literally does not matter at all. I don't think the developers know quite what to do with the Russians. This is really terrible. All right, Era 6. Resource now only applies CS bonus if unit is supplied. Let me check what it means to be supplied exactly. Okay. The army is currently located in allied territory and as such will regenerate its health and may also benefit from other abilities. Right, so you have to be in your own territory or at least start in your own territory. Okay. That is a step forward for the USSR. So this has to do with the arms, right, which increases the cost, or not the cost, increases the combat strength of all your units at the cost of a stability penalty to all your cities. Very easy to maintain, honestly, especially if you pick something like the Italians or the Austro-Hungarians in the previous era. It really is not hard. The thing is the USSR can really just steamroll over everyone by getting absurd combat strength because you just spam out these arms factories. So this means you can't like roll across territory for multiple turns with these uber high CS bonus units. The thing is like at this point in the game, the continents are so well developed that you never really need to be in enemy territory. You're just always going to be supplied, or almost always. So I'm not sure if this really does the trick here. Okay, Americans. Potentially the weakest culture in the game for the era that it comes in. There are some other candidates as well, but let's see what they have. EQ loses strength on adjacent units. EQ no longer reduces stability, thank God, because that was really silly. EQ gains gold synergy with garrisons. Okay, I mean, you're never going to have like a star of garrisons. No one builds that. There's no point. Maybe if stability were a bigger thing. EQ counts as market quarter. Okay. EQ counts as commons quarter, question mark. I'm going to assume that means it does count as a commons quarter. EQ gives plus 3 bombardment strength. Yes, this is global. Okay, so bombardment is for like artillery, not when you're in the battlefield, but when you target a unit outside the battlefield, kind of on the global strategic map. So you can stack up emblematic quarters to give extra bombardment strength. Okay. Well, I have bad news for the Chinese. They just lost their status as having the best artillery in the game. This is kind of mirroring the USSR with the CS bonus, except you're not giving a massive stability penalty. And you can basically, like, this will let you one-shot city centers if you get enough of them. or just like one-shot armies or whatever by bombarding. Now, given the stuff that you can bombard with is kind of range limited, right? So artillery, it doesn't have a great range. I don't know if I wonder if this applies to like airstrikes, if those count as bombardments. I would assume it does, but I don't actually know. But I think it would be calculated in the same way. I'd have to check on that. But anyway, this definitely makes the Americans more competitive, I think. We'll have to see how this works. So I think you could probably just run around and just one-shot everyone's cities and just kill everything. It might get a little silly. Okay, Japan. EQ loses explicit synergy effect with makers and research quarters provided by infrastructures through count as. An emblematic quarter restricted +2 science and +2 industry effects to local territory. I feel like I should know this off the top of my head, what the current is. Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. Okay, so a nerf to the robotics lab. It's probably fine. It did give a lot of both industry and science, which are really the two key components of the game. The Japanese legacy trait, untouched, which is really a big part of what makes them strong. But honestly, Japan was a very strong culture. I don't mind a little bit of a nerf to it. It should be fine. Turks, legacy trait buff to +3 food per pop was +1. I don't think this really addresses the fundamental issue with the Turks, which is that their emblematic unit is pretty bad because it's single use, so you constantly have to build them, and that the emblematic quarter gives, what is it, like science per farmer a slot, which is, you're not going to have a lot of. I don't think this really makes them better. It's going to be outshone both by Cuba and by the Brazilians. Brazil, emblematic quarter gains +3 science per adjacent farmer's quarter. Okay, so this is a flat buff. EQ gains +1 researcher slot, and the EQ now counts as a research quarter. Okay, so buffs to Brazil. I'm fine with that. I had actually been coming around on Brazil. Now, I haven't explicitly tiered the contemporary because when I did my original tier list, it was just, the game was totally broken. And it wasn't even worth tiering contemporary because there were like 2 picks that you would pick every single time. I would say Brazil was a fairly average culture. This might make them a little bit above average. Excited to play with that change, actually. Religious districts and tenets. We've added an explicit line in the count as section for religious districts. Currently, the list of religious districts includes all holy sites, normal and cultural wonders, and the following emblematic quarters. So it looks like anything that generates faith, basically, counts as a religious district. In addition to that, we have added an additional effect to the following tenets. Okay, so this looks like, yeah, so you're getting extra effect on religious districts, some kind of FIMS or stability based on the tenet that you pick. Interesting. So this is a very interesting change, actually, because it makes religious districts, things that produce faith, useful for more than just spreading your religion. You actually get some benefits to having those religious districts in terms of your outputs. And you can kind of stack them up a little bit. I don't think it's going to be a major change. Maybe if you have like a ton of them, right? So if you have like the Mayans and then the Teutons and then the Ottomans, something like that, right? And a lot of those faith generating districts in your city, you can get some okay outputs out of these. I don't think it's going to be a massive change, but I think that's a step towards making religion more useful and actually making you like want to maintain and spread your religion a little bit more quickly, because religion's kind of in a weird state at the moment. So I'm in favor of some changes to religion, and that looks like it. So what do I think overall? There are a lot of good changes, I think, and things that are going to make a lot of the cultures more useful. I think there are a few questionable ones, like the Russians. This is a very strange change and really doesn't affect the reason why you never picked the Russians. It might even be worse than what they were. or there was another weird one. I think this one might be overdoing it on the Ming. But anyway, I think overall though it's a good set of changes. It's going to make a lot of cultures more competitive. Maybe not the Phoenicians, but like the Goths is really interesting actually, and I like this move away from like these very simple sort of legacy traits and effects towards ones that are a little bit more interesting, that add some more dynamic gameplay, like actually making you want to ransack to really boon your economy. Or, like with the Ethiopians being a really defensive culture that's going to get some science benefits if they're being invaded or whatever. So, yeah, this is a good set of changes overall. Very excited to play with the beta. Though I'm still wrapping up a Let's Play on the live version, the current patch, but I'll be getting into the beta here soon and recording some gameplay. So thanks for tuning in, and as we go over the patch notes, and I'm sure there'll be some other changes, and can't wait to have my opinion evolve on these as I actually get to play with them. So see you soon.